Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Well, hello Global Outreach, wherever you are. I can imagine you're watching this on the Global Outreach website. A while back, I made this presentation to a group of Global Outreach missionaries, and Brian Albrecht suggested that we record this for use on the website. You know, I don't know where you are today. You could be here in Sierra Leone, or you could be over somewhere else, like, you could be up in the former Soviet Union, you might be in India, wherever you are. What this presentation is about is how do you tell your story of what God is doing all over here and get it down to where I live and where your supporters live, and that's right here in Kansas or Washington, California, or in Florida. Well, my name is Doug Ross, and I've been involved with Global Outreach way back when Jim Blackwood first called. Phone rang, I take the call. Jim, who had become a good friend of mine, was talking to me frequently. We'd call back and forth. And he said, Doug, at the time he was with Barry Moore at Crusade Evangelism. And he said, Doug, European Evangelistic Association contacted me, and they're looking for someone to become the president and build this organization. At that time, European Evangelistic Association was very small. It had been very vigorous under evangelist James Stewart. And then when Jim Blackwood took over, he renamed it Global Outreach Mission. And I remember his passion for this from the very start. And of course today, you are an important part of the family of more than 500 missionaries around the globe. And oftentimes in the board meetings, and I've been on the board of Global Outreach for some years, we'll recognize that it's really true that the sun never sets on the ministry of Global Outreach Mission. And whether it's evangelism, church planting, medical missions, radio broadcasts, or whatever the case may be, what we're going to talk about today is this very important fact, and that is your monthly, bi-monthly, however often you send it, prayer letter is a lifeline between you and your supporters. And I want to tell you that there are 3 reasons why you should consider your prayer letter to be extremely important. One of those, of course, is for prayer support. You want people to pray for you, and they need to know what to pray about. You want them to give financially. They need to maintain their financial support, or you can't remain on the field. And then I think there's an element of emotional support that comes from you knowing that your supporters are hearing from you. And then the missionaries have often told me how blessed they are when they get notes from home and people tell them that they are actually praying for them. Your letters are that lifeline between you and the supporters back home. Now, in writing your monthly prayer letter, you need to be yourself, and you need to tell your story the way you want to tell it. You're not going to agree with everything that I tell you in this presentation. In fact, I hope you don't, because if you think about it, whenever you hear an idea and you reject it, or you don't like it, you don't agree with it, that also is part of a valid learning experience, because you've heard an idea and you say, well, I don't like that, I'm not going to do it, and yet you've at least rejected an idea and decided to do it a different way. So I hope this might challenge your thinking, not only as to the importance of your prayer letter, but the validity of doing the very best possible job that you can. When we were together at the recent mission conference, we asked some questions in order to get acquainted. Now I want you to think about this. How long have you been a missionary? How did the Lord lead you into missions? How often do you write those back home who support you? Do you enjoy writing your donors, your supporters? One missionary at that conference said, I don't like it. And later he kind of came around and said, well, I see what you're talking about. And we often do things in life that we don't like. We all have to say, I got to do this, I'm going to get it done. And for many of us, writing that letter back home is a big chore. Do you have any idea what the response is to your letters? And I know that when you get a response, you are thrilled and you're very glad to get it. We're going to talk a little bit about how many are on your mailing list and how many give and how maybe you might do this. There's a verse in the Bible that you're very acquainted with, and you've used it lots of times when you are asking people to pray and telling them how important it is to be a missionary. In Romans 10, how then shall they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how then shall they believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher? How shall they preach unless they're sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of them that preach the gospel of peace and bring glad tidings of good joy. Well, ingrown toenails and all, if you're not sharing the gospel, you have beautiful feet. But let me paraphrase this passage of Scripture a little bit and apply it to what we're saying today. How would anyone support you if they don't believe in you? People give to missions not so much because they have a burden for South America or for Sierra Leone or for Frankfurt, Germany. They really give because they've come to believe in somebody who is going to do that. They give because they believe in you. How can they believe in you if they haven't heard of you or from you? How can they do that? And if you sat down with somebody one time and said, would you support me? And they said no, does that mean no? Or maybe it means you just need to get them more exposed to what you're doing. And how can this happen if someone doesn't tell them? You're not going to get support, you're not going to be prayed for unless somebody tells them what's going on. And how can you go if there are not senders? You can't. And so you need somebody, more than one somebody, to help you make it possible to minister where you are. Well, what is it that makes things happen? You've seen some of these things. An ad will say, nothing happens until somebody sells something. Or they'll say, nothing happens until somebody ships something. That's the shipping industry, the trucking industry. And you could also say, nothing happens until somebody prays. And so if you want things to happen in the mission field where you are, you need somebody to know what you're doing so that they will pray for you. Nobody prays until somebody tells them what to pray for. You know, we always hear about George Mueller in England, who had the orphanage, and of course he never asked for any money. But you know what he did is he went around and told everybody what to pray for. And what George Mueller knew was that until someone tells them what's needed, nobody is going to give to what's needed. And so you can't just sit back and rely on hoping people will support you. You need to tell them. Now, Dennis Campbell did a survey of global outreach missionaries. Here's what several of the statistics tell us. 35% of those surveys said that they did not mail a prayer letter at least 4 times a year. Now, keep in mind that Global Outreach Mission recommends that you send a letter out every 2 months. That's 6 times a year. But 35% said they don't do it even as often as 4 times a year. 39% said that their mailing list has grown since they started. That means, what is that? 60% say that their mailing list isn't growing. You know, if you run across somebody who might possibly be interested, then I would say you better add them to your mailing list, and that's going to need to happen as long as you're a missionary. Only 51% said they had a specific annual goal of dollars they needed to. I thought that was amazing. Tragic, but amazing. I think you all do have a goal, but maybe you've not written it down and articulated it. So think about that. What is your goal this year? What do you need? A car? Or do you need a church built? Or do you need more supplies of some kind? Or maybe gasoline to run your car? What is it that you need? Because people who give like to give to specific requests like that. 49% said that I'm emailing my prayer letter to my supporters myself. Now, I was glad to hear that, but I got to tell you that there is a reason why a printed letter as prepared by Global Outreach is a very, very important part of this mix. I would tell you, keep doing the emailing, but add to whatever you're sending by emailing the printed letter, because, and we're going to repeat this, but when Global Outreach does the letter for you, they edit it, they carefully prepare it, it goes out with a return envelope to Global Outreach Mission, and it goes out with a response card that says, my gift is to support this missionary. And I'll tell you that the big secret behind an effective appeal letter for funding that you send out in the mail is that if they hold it in their hand and look at it, at least they have to glance at it and they have something to throw away. Email, you can just hit the delete key and never see it again. So we're going to talk about this from a perspective of your prayer letter. And you could call it a prayer letter, an appeal letter, a monthly report, you can call it whatever you will. The words used primarily around Global Outreach Mission's prayer letter. And I see it as being important to tell your personal story, make sure it reflects reality. It gets some action going so people know what's happening. It talks a bit about your family. It needs some enthusiasm, and it needs to show results. And we're going to look at for all of this today as we talk about it. What is your personal story? Dennis Campbell at Global Outreach was telling me that he was very successful in business and public life and so forth, and all of a sudden found himself at a camp, and he was walking around this Bible camp, and it all of a sudden dawned on him that this was the very camp where at a fireside or a campfire, he had dedicated his life to share the gospel. And as he stood there and thought about that, he realized that he had not followed through on that commitment. And it was that experience that caused Dennis Campbell to resign his successful business positions and then found the opportunity to work at Global Outreach Mission, and today does an extremely effective job both in the office and in directing the work of Sierra Leone for Global Outreach Mission. Now on the right, you have, that's me and my grandson. And he's doing exercise. Now what's my story? Well, my story briefly is this. My parents had my sister was born, she's 6-7 years older than I am. And she's been fine, she's still alive. And then they had 2 more children that both died at birth of a cerebral hemorrhage. And the doctor said it would never happen again. Well, it did happen. And when I was born, the doctor came in and said, well, your son has the same cerebral hemorrhage. My mother then prayed the prayer of Hannah in the Old Testament and said, if you will save the life of my son, the doctor said that either that night I would die or I would become a vegetable. She prayed, and I not only lived through the night, but it was quite a number of years later before I ever had any symptoms from that, which of course is quite another story. But all of that caused me over time to sense that God was leading in my life, and as a result started out in Youth for Christ and then have been involved in a number of different Christian ministries until recently. One of those missionary opportunities, of course, has been to be involved with Global Outreach Mission. Now, I don't know about you, but when I'm traveling on an airplane, I used to lead the Evangelical Christian Publishers Association. If I was tired and I didn't want to talk to anybody, and they said, well, what do you do? I'd say, well, I'm president of the Evangelical Christian Publishers Association. And that ended almost every conversation before it ever started. If I just said I was president of the Christian Publishers Association, I'd get a sort of a positive response, depending, of course, on one's attitude toward Christianity. If I just said, well, I'm in publishing, well, then I would have a big conversation on my hand, and I could talk all the way from Denver to Okoboji because they were interested in publishing. So that has been my story, and what I want to impress upon you is something prompted you to go into mission. Something happened, and you maybe forgot about that, or you thought that it was insignificant. Quite frankly, it wasn't until I began to have symptoms from my cerebral hemorrhage when I was 65 years old, that I realized that I had a little story to tell, and I had never told it to anybody, but it had just lay there dormant. Don't let your story lay dormant. Tell it. Let people know what's kind of motivated you in life. Well, these are some better pictures. You know, that's me and my dad, and I had one of my mom, and I don't know what I did with it. This is a little better picture of me. So you have a personal story, and you need to tell it to the people back home. You're accustomed to the old idea, the great idea. You've got a story to tell to the nations. I suggest to you that you have a story to tell to the people back home, and you need to tell it regularly, frequently. Tell people what you're doing so that people know how to pray for you and what your financial needs are. We all know what we do. You know your country, you know your ministry, but at best, and I should have put a slash between we and we or your supporters are just tourists. I've been to a lot of countries, even involved in those countries helping publishers or whatever, but never really got past the airport and the hotel and the conference center where we were meeting. I have been to a lot of countries where I could tell you that I don't know very much about the country because I was there to meet with some people and work with them and so forth. And you are not a tourist. We're tourists. I need to know what it is you're doing and what your obstacles are, what your concerns are, and what's happening. The other thing is, we not only don't know much about you, but you need to understand that many of the people who support you are very, very busy, and they forget something that you told them 3 months ago, and now you make a brief reference to it today, and they've forgotten all about what you told them 3 months ago. Oh yeah, there are some supporters that hang on every word you write, and they'll know everything you've told them, but there are so many more who don't pay close attention, and you need to keep them up to date. There's something else that you might even overlook from your perspective, except that I think most of you minister in a country where the pace of change is perhaps even more obvious and rapid than it is in our country today. But in our country today, and this graph here means really nothing except to say to you, everything in America today, where most of your support comes from, and this would be true of England and some other countries, things are up and down all the time. War is going to break out here. Going to be a financial crisis there. Gold's where you ought to put your money. Oh, gold just fell $300 an ounce. Oh, you ought to do this and that. Heard an ad the other day that said your 401k is rotting away in the stock market. Well, not today. Old ad, I guess. But things are up and down and up and down. And quite honestly, most of the people that I talk to have a certain fear in kind of their gut level that says, who do we trust? How do we know what's going on? And they're worried about what's happening. And you are asking them to support you out of that kind of an environment. So understand that the people of support that support you have a lot of questions, and they need you to keep in touch with them or they'll not give. Well, Henrietta Mears, who founded Gospel Light Publishers, and this is kind of a paraphrase, you can see this stated in different ways. A teacher is not taught a lesson until his or her pupil has learned it. Your donor doesn't know what you're doing until they've really learned it. And a brief little paragraph isn't going to do that. I think you need multiple tracks of communication. Larry Ward, who founded Food for the Hungry and previously had worked with World Vision, was one of the great relief and development missionaries in the world and a great heart for God. He said often, don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. In other words, communicate with the people that you want to support you in as many different ways as you can. So your personal story, the reality of what's going on, action, your family, enthusiasm, and results, all of that is important. So what about your personal story? Don't assume that everybody knows why you're there, what you're doing, and what's happening. Welcome new supporters with your story. If somebody, you're off in the field, somebody starts to support you, make sure they hear from you and kind of hear a little introduction to your story. Make personal application of what God is doing in your life. What's happening with you spiritually, and show how you deal with difficulty. Something went wrong, and now you had to work through that. Somebody that you thought was now a believer turns out that you question that because of some behavior. Maybe they became active in your church and now they've done something. Share some of that so people can pray with you about it. How is all of this impacting your family? You know, we know back home that missionary kids, like preachers' kids, are impacted, sometimes very negatively, by the fact that their parents are in ministry. So from a spiritual standpoint, let people know how this is impacting your country. Not your country, well, that too, but how is it impacting your family? And then tell what's happening so we can see the reality of the people that you are reaching. Not every conversion is dramatic. Not every church service sees results. Not every church that's started actually continues. It's just like back home. We have all the same problems too. Well, what's the reality of what's happening? Well, not everybody that you minister to becomes a Christian. Some people say, no, we can handle that. The donor can handle that. Happens to us all the time here. Not everything works out and is a happy day. Not every day is filled with great blessing and enthusiasm. And let us know what some of those bad days are like. Everything you do is not a sacrifice. You enjoy what you're doing. Enjoy it. I'm having fun doing what I'm doing. And let us know that. We need to sense that you really enjoy where you are and what you're doing. And sometimes you, like us, can't figure out what it is that God is doing. Where is He? Why doesn't He do this or that or the other thing? Sometimes we all wonder about that. And we know you need prayer, but why? You got to tell us what to pray for. Finances are tough. We know this, but often it's not talked about. Inflation is a killer for most missionaries. And the other thing is, of course, the value of the dollar. Nothing wrong with you. In fact, everything good. If you're experiencing that, let's say the value of the dollar has fallen 10-20%, which means that when you get your support money, that $100 gift is now going to result in only $90 because of the devaluation of the dollar. Your supporters need to know that, because over the last several years, sometimes a missionary might have lost 30% of their support to a declining value of the dollar. But the people sending the money often just simply that does not dawn on. Action. Your prayer letters need to reflect that there's some things happening that are very, very exciting and good. What is it that God is doing? Tell us and show us what you are doing. Let people know the lengths to which you have to go to get something done. I remember Jim Black telling me about how long it took him on an auto drive to visit some missionaries. Some of the conditions where he slept, being in a hotel where he felt he was in a very dangerous situation. Those are the kinds of things that people want to hear about, the lengths that you have to go. Brian Albrecht, and I would like to tell you that as a board member of Global Outreach Mission, the transition from Jim Blackwood to Brian Albrecht has been seamless. I would tell you the best transfer of leadership that I've ever watched and been a part of as a member of a board of directors. And Brian's doing a wonderful job leading Global Outreach Mission. And he's come back from some trips absolutely exhausted, and yet recognizes that for him it was a visit to see you, but for you it's an everyday experience. Now when you're writing the letter, don't harangue and go on and on and on and tell us every little thing that happened, but get to the heart of it. What did the person say? How did they respond? Were they hurt in the accident? Were you? Etc., etc. And just tell it like it is. Little stories of leading someone to Christ, or helping someone in need, or helping to build a church, all of that provides some interesting details and suggests to the donor that you're out there really making something happen and that God is using you. Break your letter up into some digestible chunks. You know, one thing in writing a letter like this, grammar's not so important. I'll tell you, dashes in the letter are very important. Commas kind of suggest to the mind that you should stop. Dashes kind of suggest let's keep going and let's, follow through on this. And then break it up into shorter paragraphs. And we're going to show you how that happens for you in just a second. But break your story up into digestible chunks. Your family, some missionary letters that I've read seem more like a family report than a missionary report. Now there are some things you should do. Report on cute or interesting events. If you have little children and you've discovered that birthdays are celebrated differently or not at all, you might tell that story, maybe show a picture of it, how you suggested to some kids or parents that they could have a birthday party, and share a little story like that with us. How is Christmas celebrated? Is it celebrated? What are the stories surrounding that in regard to your family? How do your children interact with neighbors? Now, I'm not sure. I almost should have changed that to indigenous. I'm sure for most of you, native isn't the word you're wanting to use, but how do your children interact with them? I think people would find that to be of some interest. Request prayer for your children, and consider sending a special letter or email to family members to report on things of interest just to them. For the most part, the donor wants to hear about your ministry, how it impacts your family, maybe some things your kids are doing or things that they have said, but there are a lot of things that your relatives would like to hear, and the donor who doesn't know them isn't especially interested to hear. So my suggestion to you would be to communicate those family details to your family back home in a separate email, and just give the interesting ministry-oriented family things in the prayer letter. Keep stories short and to the point. Well, there are some things I want to suggest that you don't do. Don't focus so much on your family. Be sure you're concentrating on the ministry. And don't focus solely on the negative. Stay on the positive. In fact, you can always tell a negative story in a positive light and show how it has, how that negative piece has fit in with your total ministry impact in your country. Don't forget pictures. We're going to talk more about pictures in just a minute, but pictures are so very important. The old cliche is, of course, pictures worth 1,000 words. A picture's probably worth 10,000 words if they know what the picture is about, which means you got to have some words, a caption they call it. And don't over or understate. Be honest and forthright. Don't gloss over and make it sound like the whole country was converted, and don't understate it as if nothing happened. Enthusiasm is an interesting word, a part of this prayer acrostic. Theologians better than I could describe this, but one definition I read suggested that the word enthusiasm comes from the idea of being possessed by a god. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "Nothing ever happens or is achieved without enthusiasm." Now, the over-enthusiastic person comes across sometimes as if enthusiasm is the only thing that matters. The under-enthusiastic person sort of acts like maybe enthusiasm is a sin. Well, if you're not enthusiastic about what God is doing through you in your country, you probably should come home. Because if you're not enthused, who on earth is going to pray for you or support you? And after all, if enthusiasm has something to do with being possessed by a God, then we probably should put a capital letter on that for the Christian and say, hey, I'm enthused because I am possessed by God. Now, regularity. You know, my wife always cautions me, says, don't tell this story, but I had a doctor one time who told me that good health was somewhere in between constipation and diarrhea. That's what they call regularity. Well, regular communication is extremely important. Global Outreach Mission recommends that every 2 months you send a printed letter. It'll include a response card, an envelope, and when that gift comes in, it will go to your support account. They say every 2 months. They say send pictures. They really are worth 1,000 words. What else might you do? Send a personal letter once a year. And let's say you have 200 donors. That means every month you could send 20 personal letters. That means every day you might send a personal note to each of your donors. To this day, and let's face it, many of your donors are older people. They love getting mail. They love getting foreign mail. Oh, look, here's a stamp from Nigeria. Send them a personal letter, and if you can, write it. If you can't, type it on your computer. Hi, this month we're having, bad weather, good weather, all is well. We've had 3 people find Christ, whatever you want to tell them. But especially the ones that you know are supporting you regularly, send them a personal letter once a year, and however many you have, if you sent 1 a day, 1 a week, pretty soon you reach them all. And then send your email updates in the months between the Global Outreach Mission printed letters. Those emails, and I see many of them that you send to your missionaries, are very attractive and very interesting and very, very important. And if you send the information to Global Outreach Mission, they will send that email out to you, out to your mailing list, to your email list, and that will be a nice filler in between the printed letter. And I think it will result in your getting even more support than you're getting now. There's an old adage about promotion, and it is this, that we need to tell them, and we then need to tell them again, and then we need to tell them what we've told them. In other words, one mention of something, hey, we're going to have a meeting next Friday, isn't enough. Or in 2 weeks we're going to have this, or whatever. Or dear friend, we're building a new church. We need $5,000. Would you support us sincerely? No. You need to tell them again, and tell them what you told them. And if you do that, I'm not saying drive them crazy with information, but keep them well informed. Keep the people who support and love you well informed. And these printed letters matter because Global Outreach includes that envelope and that reminder, and it makes it easier for the donor to respond. Now, let me quickly ask this question. Do you think people like fewer or shorter letters? I'm not aware of anybody who ever sent a gift into a church or a Christian organization or to a missionary and said, dear friend, I haven't heard from you for 9 months, but I was thinking about you and I thought I'd give a gift because I so much appreciate not hearing from you. No, people don't do that. They don't give because you haven't bothered them with letters. Now, if you sent them a letter every week, they might write and say, leave me alone for a week or 2. But if they heard from you by email once a month, 6 times a year, and they heard from you with a printed letter the other 6 months out of the year, that will be a very nice balance of communication, and I believe that it will result in better support. Fewer letters are not the answer, nor are shorter letters. All the statistics say that a 4-page letter outpulls a 2-page, and a 2-page outperforms a 1-page. Now, for your monthly communication by email or snail mail, a letter the equivalent of 2 pages is quite adequate. Anything less than 2 pages probably does not look important enough in the mind of the donor. And it is not so much that if you send a long letter, people will read everything in it. It's that they scan it and they catch the drift. Now, I once sent out a letter that was 16 pages long for a client of mine, and it outperformed everything that we had ever done. Why? Is it because a lot of people read every page of that? No. It's because most people scanned it, they read the PS, they pick up some of the things, and then they got interested and they said, well, I'm going to support this. But also it drew them in and then caused them to read the whole thing. And of course, the big deal is openership, and that is when they got a 16-page letter in the mail, it was fat enough that they were bound and determined to open it because they want to see what this big package is. Now, I'm not suggesting a 16-page letter. In fact, we had a little trouble with that one, but nonetheless, it worked. But I'll tell you this, positive results will always be reflected in some negative results. Somebody isn't going to like something that you said, and that, my friend, is life. Snail mail gives you something to throw away. Email, something to delete. A balance of the two. People will then be able to respond the way they like to respond. And if they get the email today, because Dennis has set it up this way, they can give very easily over the internet if that is their choice. How do you say thanks? Well, do you ever write a special personal thank you note and say, hey, I am so grateful for your support, or your support? What do you do if somebody, all of a sudden, let's say somebody's giving you $25 a month, and all of a sudden, for reasons you don't know, they send you $500. What do? Well, I hope what you do is you write them a note and say, wow, I was so grateful to receive your gift of $500, and this is what it allowed us to do. What do you do when a church increases its giving and says we want to help you, or they contribute to a special need? All the more you need to respond to them. What do you do when that same church maybe has to decrease their support? Well, you should write them and thank them. Keep that door open, because maybe sometime in the future they'll be able to come back on board. Now, here are some questions. Would it be worthwhile? You'll find out I think so, but how about if you decided to spend 1 hour every week for praying and responding to your supporters? You sit down and you say, I haven't been in touch with this person or that person, and you pray for them and their family, and you write them a little note or something. What if you spent an hour every week doing that? I think you'd find it a blessing in your life and a blessing in theirs. Big complaint I always hear is people say, I give and I don't hear what's happening. How long does it take you to write your letter and send it to Global Outreach every 2 months, I should say? How much time do you spend on that? Consider that, and then maybe ask yourself, maybe I should be spending a little more time developing this important letter. Let me suggest something that I think would help. I used to have to write a newsletter every 2 months for an organization, a trade association of publishers. And I had a file folder that just simply had the name of the newsletter on it, and throughout every day, if I saw a quote somewhere, article somewhere, an ad that I thought I wanted to quote from, if I had a member send me something or say something, I'd stick it in that file. And then when I sat down to write that newsletter, I had a pile of stuff that I could go through, sift, and say, well, I'll use this, and I'll use that. I had a little part of it that said a word from the Word, and I was always looking for something that would help to make that column very interesting. I also always read the previous newsletter first to see what did I tell them last month and what should I be reminding them of. And I would suggest to you that you read last month's prayer letter before you write this month's email, or last month's email before you write this month's printed newsletter. And your idea file will be an excellent resource, and it'll help make the writing of that newsletter so much easier. I was going through a lot of the prayer letters, and I found this quote that one of you sent in, a missionary said, "Blessed are the office staff, as we would be sunk without them." We have a prayer letter team, as it were, at the office, and they take your material that you send in, and they make your prayer letter out of it every 2 months. And Bea and Pat and Tammy work on that together and do a wonderful job. What they request is that when you send it in, attach your material for the prayer letter, attach it in a Word document to your email. Don't have it in the body of the email. Attach it, and then in the subject line, if you would, please put current prayer letter or email update, something that tells Tammy and Pat or Bea that this is your letter. Why? Because if you don't do that, if it's just a letter, just some material, they have to write you back and say, what is this for? Because they don't want to send out something that you didn't intend to be their prayer letter. So that is very helpful to the staff. It's helpful if your mailing list has at least 200 names on it, and some of you don't have that large of a list. The reason that's helpful, or less expensive, is because to mail it out at the nonprofit postage rate, you have to mail 200 copies. And so if you only have 150, the postage cost for your letter will be significantly higher. And then work with the office to keep your list up to date. Mailing lists change all the time. People move, they die, they want to be removed, they want to add somebody, whatever. Work with the office to keep your list up to date. And then also send photos as a separate attachment to the same Word document or another one, but be sure and identify that it's to go with the May prayer letter or the June or whatever it is that you're sending it for. Now, photos. What's a good photo? What's a bad photo? Now, we can spend a lot of time about these two photos as to which one is the better photo. The one on the left, I kind of like because it's an informal. Obviously, a meeting is going on, and there's a discussion going on, and people are interested. That's probably the one I would tend to use, although that big black empty chair in the middle causes me to wonder if I want to use this photo. Now, the one on the right is good. Obviously, the people are paying attention, but it's, to me, a little staged. I suggest that you don't get a lot of pictures of people all lined up in a row, smiling for the camera, but try to get some shots of people that are doing things, catching them unawares. Now, this is my wife. We were on a camping trip, and she broke her ankle, made the rest of the trip really terrific. And now, if you had somebody that broke their leg, maybe you, and you wanted to show it, which picture would you use? Well, you would use the one on the left, because you can see that she's got a cast on, and over on the right, you're not so sure. Everything is kind of under the table, and the focus really is, in fact, she's eating her lunch. That boat in the background isn't mine, but nonetheless, we were having a good time. Now, it's pretty obvious here what's good and what's bad. A little dark, both of them, but the one on the left is terrific because look at those kids. They're having a great time. It'd be nice to know what was going on. Was this a riot or a revival? But the one on the left is good. The one on the right, not only are the people rather motionless, but it's way too dark and not such a good photo, so I would say don't use the one on the right. Now, these are both good photos. If you wanted, this is in Sierra Leone, if you wanted to show that the building was there and it's a nice building and it's completed, then that's a good photo. But if you want something that's more obviously ministry, maybe the sign is a little more obvious, There's Brian Albrecht, who's preaching in front of that building, and obviously there's some people listening. Depending on what you're trying to show, I'd say the photo on the right is probably the better photo. Now, what's the progression of a letter? Well, you send in the documents the way we've suggested. And many times, usually, the document will look like this one. This is an actual document that was received in the office. Now, you can't send it out that way, at least unless you want to violate everything I'm talking about, because who's going to read that kind of a page? And then there's some photos that they sent in and so forth. Well, here is the completed letter. The document on the left resulted in the document on the right. And that is a great execution of what was sent in. And they worked very careful to put everything in the right sequence, make sure the grammar is good. Those are digestible paragraphs. It's a very interesting printed newsletter. Randy and Jan do a great job with their newsletter because that starburst on the upper left-hand side is a standard for them, and every time the letter goes out, they have a different headline in that box. So the donor is tuned into that to see what that headline might be. And those kind of treatments are very helpful to making a newsletter, a prayer letter, very interesting. You might think about that as a way to dress up your newsletter. You'll remember that we said a survey showed that 35% didn't mail their prayer letter at least 4 times a year. 39% said their mailing list had grown. 51% had a specific annual goal. 49% said, I'm emailing my prayer letter to my supporters myself, no printed letter. Not such a good report. What I would suggest is you think about your list in this way. Now, don't overcomplicate this, but you have at least 3 segments to your list. You have people that are primarily prayer warriors. They would think of themselves as praying for you. You have people who are financial supporters, and hopefully those 2 are one of the same, but quite likely not. And then you have potential donors. Potential donors you could break down into 2 categories, potential and not so potential. But nonetheless, you want to try to move the potential into the monthly financial supporters. And I suggest to you that you don't have to come home to do that, even though coming home to do that is extremely important, both for nurturing your current donors, but also for finding new ones. But I suggest to you that if your potential donors, and there's probably 10 or 12 on your mailing list that you could identify who you think might support, and maybe they're scared of a monthly pledge, but they would give you $25 a month by sending you a check for $300. So think of your people that way and break it down in your mind, and then communicate with people. Maybe send the email to the prayer warriors, and maybe not include them in something else. But think about how you're communicating with your donors. Now, if you have a question about all of this, Dennis Campbell and his staff are eager to respond and support any way that they possibly can. You know how to reach them, you know how to contact them, and I would urge you to talk to them and see what you can do to improve your communication, the creation of that monthly, bi-monthly, regular lifeline between you and your donors. Let me suggest you think about 3 things. I said you wouldn't agree with everything I said. I would hope you might agree with these and think about doing this. 1, provide a letter to Global Outreach Mission every 2 months. Try that for a year, see what happens. Create that idea file so that you start putting some stuff aside that you think you would like to write about when you write these letters. And then schedule a prayer letter day where you, your wife, whoever sits down and you say, okay, let's really think through what we're saying, how we should say it, and give this a little time, concentrated time to think through how you're communicating with the folks back home. And remember this, why would anyone support you if they do not believe in you? And how can they believe in you if they haven't heard of you or from you? How can this happen if someone doesn't tell them? And how can you go if there are not senders? Those folks back home on your mailing list are a very important lifeline. Well, we've all learned this from being kids in Sunday school, and yet it applies not just to your preaching, not just to your evangelism, not just to building churches. It applies to the writing of this important prayer letter. Whatever you do it all to the glory of God. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll write and be in touch with us. Let Global Outreach Mission know how they can help.